So today we're going to be talking about social media analytics, and we're going to be looking at, as I said, Facebook and Twitter. There we go. So outline for the day, and we've already done the welcome and introductions. Can everybody see this okay? Brill. So we've already done the welcome introductions. I'm going to introduce social media analytics, going to talk about some of the key features. Then we're going to have a couple 5-minute breaks, whether or not they're at these times depends on how we get through the content. Then we're going to have two sort of focused activities, one looking at Facebook Insights, and then after another break, we'll look at Twitter Analytics. I'll sort of show you the back end of the platforms, and then we'll have an activity. I did email out two sort of activities, one for Facebook, one for Twitter, in the form of PDFs. If you have access to your museum's social media accounts, or even your own Twitter account, for instance, or a Facebook page you might manage, you'll probably find that you'll get a lot more out of the training if you can use those for the activities. But those documents, if you can only use those documents, they should be fine as well. And then we're going to be really fortunate, technology permitting, to be joined by Stephen Franklin from Egham Museum, who ran an excellent social media campaign called the National Oddity Championships of 2020 through Twitter. I've talked about this before in previous social media sessions because it's a really good example of a social media campaign engagement activity. But Stephen's going to be talking about that, but also focusing on the analytics side of it, because he's produced a really detailed, excellent report looking at the campaign, the sort of benefits, the different statistics, increase in social media followers, that sort of stuff. So provided all of the tech works, Stephen will be joining us later in the afternoon, and he'll talk through that towards the end. And then at the end, there's going to be an opportunity for questions. If you have a really sort of urgent question or something that you really want clarification on, feel free to either pop it in the chat, or if you put it in the chat and you and I don't respond, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And then when I come to edit it, I'll just edit that out, unless you're happy for it to be included, of course. So is everybody happy with that? Brill, thank you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is Zoom groups. So when we come to the activities, we'll be doing them in Zoom groups as well. But the way that a Zoom group works is I break everybody up into separate groups. And then you basically, do the activity together or discuss together. So for this activity, you're going to be talking about the experience that you have with social media analytics. And then you're also hopefully going to be discussing some ideas about why it's important to use social media analytics. So I will break you up into groups now. So if everybody's happy to just quickly mute themselves again, and then we'll carry on with the session. We'll use those Zoom groups again when we come to the activities, so you can sort of talk to each other and help each other out. So why use social media analytics? I think a lot of these have been covered. I think one thing that I will say is that this session is, although you don't have to have been to the very much like Marvel films, you don't have to have been to the previous 3 sessions to sort of get the content of this one. But they do sort of follow on, and we are releasing these as videos on our YouTube channel. I can share a link to that at the end. But the video that I'll be putting out today is on social media strategy. And so these all sort of very much sort of tie in and link together, and having a social media strategy can be really useful and can be really important. But if you're not analyzing your content and seeing how your content is performing, you have no idea about how effective your strategy is being. So evaluate the success of your strategy to make your content work harder. That was sort of in the theme of something that somebody mentioned, the ability to see what's working, what isn't working, so that you can do more of what does and less of what doesn't, I think is really important. Also, museums tend to have a build it and they will come mentality. So that idea that whatever you put out, everyone's going to enjoy. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Particularly sort of as technology develops, there's more and more options for content, the platforms that you can consume that content on, but the types of content that are available. So, museums nowadays are competing with the likes of Netflix and Amazon Prime and all of that sort of stuff, Prime Video, in a sense. But then museums also have sort of unique perspectives, unique collections that very much give them an advantage over those platforms. So it's very much about, working out what your audience likes, what your audience doesn't like, and making sure that you deliver that content as consistently and as well as you can. I think it is important to be realistic, though. We're all sort of small museums with small staff. Very few of us are experts in content creation. A lot of us sort of learn this as we end up doing it. So don't be too harsh on yourselves and expect the world. But there's lots of good examples of organizations doing great work online through social media, using analytics and having success with the stuff they're creating. And that's why I'm quite looking forward to that Egham Museum case study later on, because Egham Museum, I think they have something like 2,000 to 3,000 followers on Twitter, but it was a really successful campaign. So I think that's a really good example to hear some more about later on. Reporting and highlighting successes, that's been mentioned. The one thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think is slightly important, is the taking advantage of boosting our advertising, particularly on Facebook. A large number of larger organizations, the Museum of London included, doesn't really bother to use Facebook unless they're able to put a little bit of money behind each post to boost it so that it can be seen by more people. And the way the boosting works is that you have the post and then you basically pay Facebook for them to put it in front of people who don't necessarily follow you or like your page, so that it increases that audience. And you can spend as little as sort of £5-10 and you can have your content seen by quite a few more people. The one thing that I will say is that because we're in the position of not necessarily knowing what our audiences would want, and when you're reaching newer audiences as well, is you can take advantage of boosting and advertising through the sense that if you've got an idea of what's already working well, you can create a specific piece of content that you know will work well, and then you can boost that as opposed to just boosting absolutely everything and seeing what sticks, because everybody has very small budgets. You can put a little bit more money behind something that you know is much more likely to work, something that you've worked longer on. So something like the Egham Museum's National Oddity Championships, if you were doing something like that, that might be something that you would want to put a little bit of money behind so that you can increase that audience. Does that make sense for everyone? Brill. So the key features of analytics. So there's lots of different types of data that you can get from social media analytics. And I think the most important thing, particularly at early stages, is to focus your efforts where you think you're going to have the biggest impact. So somebody mentioned reaching new audiences. If you're looking to reach new audiences, maybe you want to focus your work around the audience data, information on the people following or liking your stuff. If you're trying to, let's say, increase conversations through your social media platforms, you might want to be focusing more on the actions or engagements or the textual data so that you can see how well your content is performing and if it is having the desired effect of creating conversations. If you're trying to increase traffic to your website through social media, then you might want to be looking at doing hyperlink tracking so you can see how many people are clicking from your social media platforms to your website. And you can you'd have to do that through Google Analytics. You can see how many people click a hyperlink on social media, but you then start to use Google Analytics on your website so you can see how many people came from social media to your website and then the sorts of things that they're doing on your website as a result. So just to quickly go through the different features of analytics, you've got audience data. So that's the information on the people who are liking or following your accounts on Facebook or Twitter, but it's the same for Instagram as well. The types of audience data that you can get are quite narrow and quite binary. So, whether they're male or female, their location, you can sort of drill down into the location by city, which can be quite useful if you're trying to build a more local audience. But in general, you're not going to get sort of like, ethnic background, that sort of stuff. You won't get that from social media platforms. So if you're really looking to build, a more diverse audience base, then you very much need to use social media analytics in hand with other tactics like surveys and, going out to your communities and that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying that social media analytics will be the fix-all for reaching those different audiences. You can get age as well, age breakdown, which can be quite handy if you're trying to reach younger audiences. You can get that sort of like rough overview of how old your audience is. And when we come to look at the platforms, I'll sort of show you where all of this data is. The next thing that you can get is reach and impressions number. So I'm just going to really quickly explain what reach and impressions are, and then the difference between reach/impressions and action/engagement. The reason that I've got slashes in there is because social media platforms are awkward and like to call the same thing different things. The way that reach and impressions work, basically one reach or one impression means that one person has seen your content. And seen is a very loose term. So different platforms sort of categorize seen as different things. But in general, the easiest way to think about it is if you're scrolling through your phone and things are appearing in your news feed on Facebook, let's say, that means that you've seen that piece of content. So you'll count as one reach or impression for all of those things you've just scrolled past. So even though a piece of content, let's say, has 100,000 reach or 100,000 impressions, that doesn't mean that 100,000 people would remember seeing it. If you were to survey those people and say, do you remember seeing this thing that Facebook tells me you've seen? I'd say 80% would probably say no, maybe even more. So that's why it's important to take reach and impressions with a grain of salt. And that grain of salt is the actions and engagements. So it's really the actions and engagements that will tell you how many people have sort of seen your content to such an extent that they've desired to interact with it in some way. So an action or engagement could be a thing like a like or a share or a retweet, a view on a video, a comment, anything that you can do, even clicking on a Facebook post or a Twitter or a tweet counts as an engagement. And again, when we look at it, I'll show you where all of those stats are so you can see the different types of stats and the different types of engagements. But what you want to be thinking about is firstly, the number of people who have seen a piece of content. Secondly, the number of people who have interacted with a piece of content. And then thirdly, what you are hoping to achieve with that piece of content. So as an example, let's say that I wanted I use this example a lot, but I think it's a good example. I wanted to start a conversation through something that I posted on social media. If that piece of content had 500,000 impressions, so theoretically 500,000 people have seen it, but it only receives, and say it receives like 10,000 likes and 500 or 600 shares, something like that, but it only gets 20 comments, and all of those comments are people saying like, this is interesting, or thank you for sharing, or tagging their friends in the comments below. If my intention through that piece of content was to start a conversation, in a way it's failed because it's been seen by loads of people and it's had a good few engagements, but it's not achieved what I wanted it to achieve. The same could be said if you wanted to increase access to your collections. So if you wanted to increase access to your collections, your main aim might just be to have as many sort of eyeballs on that stuff as possible. So you might be looking for high reach and high impressions, and you might not be too fussed about the number of comments and that sort of stuff that you're receiving. You might just want to be looking at that top level line, so that lots of people have seen it. Obviously, if you're getting lots of actions and engagements, lots of likes and shares, even comments, that sort of stuff, that's really good too. And then you can look at success as a breakdown in percentage. So let's say that you have 100 impressions and you get 10 engagements. That's a 10% engagement conversion. Does that make sense? So when it comes to the percentage different, Twitter gives you that percentage. I don't know if Facebook does. It might do, so you might need to work it out. But anything above 10% is really good. Anything above 3 or 4% is pretty good. Anything below 2% isn't so great. But again, you want to be thinking about what you deem as successful. So taking the context of what you wanted to achieve with what you're using social media to do. Success is very much defined by the number of people who've seen it, the number of actions and engagements that it gets, and what you hope to achieve with that. And then that's why I come on to the textual data. So textual data can be really important, and it's something that some people often forget, is that whilst the numbers of comments, if you get lots of numbers of comments, that can look really good in a report, but you might want to start drilling down into the comments themselves, what people are actually saying. And that's why I put that down as textual data. So again, thinking about that starting conversations example, if loads of people are commenting, you're getting hundreds and hundreds of comments, but all of them are just like, thanks for this is really interesting, cheers for sharing. If you're trying to start a conversation, that isn't conversational. Whereas if you post something, you only get 5 or 6 comments, but all of those comments are really meaningful, sort of saying how, this piece of social media, let's say you shared a collection item or a photograph or something, you might get some really interesting comments that are sort of speaking about how that thing is important to that person. You might say that the piece of content only got 5 comments, but really meaningful comments, was much more successful than the piece of content that had hundreds of comments, but none of those comments were overly meaningful. And again, it's about thinking about what you want to achieve and what you define as success. And that's not necessarily something that I can tell you. It's something that you need to sort of think about. And then that's why I come back to that strategy side of things. If you have a sort of clear social media strategy with sort of outlined goals of what you want to achieve with social media, it makes using analytics a lot easier, because you have that idea of what success is. So you can spend less time analyzing stuff because you know exactly what you're looking for. Is everybody happy with that? Brill. We've got hyperlink tracking, which I talked about real quick, and basically the idea that you can see how many people click on a hyperlink. So that could be for a video on YouTube, or it could be a link to an event on your website. You can see how many people click that link, and you can deem how successful the piece of content is based on the clicks. So if you were trying to sell tickets to an event, you would look at how many people click the link, firstly, how many people followed through to your website, let's say, secondly, how many people purchased the ticket as a third. And you look at that as a conversion rate. So if you had loads of people clicking on the social media content and clicking the link to your website, but very few people purchasing tickets, there's an issue there somewhere. The issue may be that the social media content you're putting out is really good, but the event itself isn't what people are looking for. And there's things that you can do to then analyze that and think a little bit harder about the types of events that you're putting on, or even how you're wording like text for events and that sort of stuff. And then lastly, we've got video views and video reactions, video shares, and video statistics. The good thing about Facebook is that it has a whole separate section on video, so you can look at some really interesting statistics around video. The bad thing about Facebook is that it has a history of lying about video statistics. I think they actually were recently sued by a number of companies because they lied. They basically inflated the number of the statistics for videos, and then a number of companies like BuzzFeed did a real hard push, sort of like putting a lot of money, a lot of resources behind Facebook video, and then not getting a huge amount of return other than inflated statistics. And then they later found out that Facebook were inflating statistics quite considerably. And a lot of these companies have suffered financially because of that. That's just a dig at Facebook. It's not overly relevant to the training, in the sense that with any social media statistics, any analytics, even Google Analytics, you always want to take what you're seeing with a pinch of salt, because it's not the gospel truth, because there's lots of different contexts that come into play when people interact with social media or interact with your website. You can get very much the sort of like top line stuff, but you really can't get a sense of who that person is, what their intentions are, why they're there. And that's the sort of stuff that for museums is really valuable, but unfortunately you just can't get through social media analytics. The one thing you can make is make educated assumptions and educated decisions. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So key metrics for data for audiences. talked about this a little bit, but you can look at things like location. So if you're trying to increase the number of people who are attending your events, for instance, in all likelihood, they're going to be local people, if not in London, around London. So if you're putting out loads of event posts, but your audience is only 20% from England, and of those 20%, 10% are from London, that's a really small subsection that you're trying to reach through your event posts. So again, it's about making that decision of, if you are trying to use social media predominantly to increase sales of tickets and that sort of stuff, you need to be thinking about the audience that you have and how you can start trying to build a more local audience if you don't already have one. You can look at age. Again, it gives you an age brackets, but you can tell whether or not your audience is, in a younger demographic or a slightly older demographic. And you also want to be thinking about the ages of audiences that you want to be reaching. The thing that is important to remember is that lots of different people use lots of different platforms, but in general, platforms like TikTok and Instagram are used by younger people. Platforms like Facebook and Twitter are used by older people. So, Twitter, you'll probably find a lot of over 30s, the same for Facebook. Instagram and Twitter, you'll probably find a lot of under 30s. Instagram and TikTok, you'll find a lot of under 30s. TikTok, you'll find a lot of under 20s. So a lot of the work that you want to be doing is thinking about the audiences that you want to be reaching, looking at the audiences that you already have, and then making a decision as to whether or not you want to change the types of content you're putting out there to reach a younger audience, or do you want to change the platforms that you're using to sort of reach the audience where they already are. So if you're trying to reach a younger audience, maybe you could, change your content up so that it seems a bit more, relevant to younger people. You could look at how your audience age changes over the course of a few months. Maybe it starts getting younger, and in that case, you could see that was a success. But then at the same time, you might be alienating your older audiences who you already have on that platform. So, that's a decision that you'd have to make, whether you're willing to sort of take that chance, or if you wanted to just set up a separate platform on, say, TikTok or Instagram and just focus on a younger audience for that platform, and sort of build it from scratch. And then the time fans are online. I'll show that. That's on Facebook, but that can give you a good idea of when the majority of your audience is online, what time they're online. So you can start tailoring your content so that it goes out around the peak times of activity. I'll show you that a bit later. So first key steps. Talked a little bit about this already, but you always want to start, before you start any sort of big strategy or review into your analytics, you want to do a sort of few steps to review and get an idea of where you already are. So you want to work out where your audience is, so where they're based, and how that lines up to your strategy of using social media, if you have one. You want to work out what your audience is interested in, and that's something that you can do through Twitter quite lightly, but I'll show you again later on. Work out the average age of your audience members, and again, whether that's meeting your strategy and your goals through social media. And then, so that's point 4, working out whether or not your audience is meeting your target demographics, and if you want to make a change to meet a different audience, and then thinking about whether or not your content is relevant to that audience. And then thinking about the changes that you could make, and making sure that you benchmark. So you set that benchmark of, this is where we're at now, and this is where we want to be in 2 or 3 years. And that's 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 months, however long you want. And that's something that you can do through a social media strategy. And again, a social media strategy doesn't have to be really in depth and really top line. It could literally just be 4 or 5 goals that you want to achieve through using social media. Some of the ways that you might achieve it, or go about achieving it, and then using analytics to review how successful you've been in the process of achieving that goal. Does that make sense for everyone? Awesome. We're going to be having a break in a sec, don't worry. So key metrics for data. I've already talked about a lot of these, reach and impressions. Does anybody want me to go over reach and impressions again, or engagement again, or are you happy that we've sort of covered that? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. If you would like me to go over it again, pop a message in the chat or shout out. But again, I'll be sharing the recording of this session within the next few weeks. So if you wanted to go over it again, you can just look back on the recording. We've talked about conversion rate, so the percentage difference between reach and impressions and engagements. In general, the higher the percentage, the better. But you do also want to be looking at the quality of the engagements. And again, quality isn't something that I can decide for you. Quality is very much decided about what you want to achieve through your use of social media. You can look at the text itself. Again, we were talking about the quality of the texts. Does knowing what your audience wants / interested in relate to exhibition proposals? That's a really interesting question. I'm gonna have a think about that for a sec. My first sort of off the cuff answer to that would be that it depends on whether or not you see a separation between your online audience and your physical, like, museum visitors. So if this is going to be a sort of in-person exhibition as opposed to an online exhibition, you might want to be thinking more about what your in-person visitors want to see. If it's going to be an online an online exhibition, then you might want to be trying to think about a middle ground, because the likelihood is the people who come to your museum to see your exhibitions are going to be interested in your online exhibitions. But the people who don't tend to come in to visit your museum, your online audiences, may also be interested in your online exhibitions. So I think it's a bit of a sort of give and take. Does that answer your question a little bit? I think any data that you can use to help inform the things that you're doing is a good thing. Amazing. And then referral traffic. So again, talking about those hyperlinks, how many people are going from your social media platforms to your website? The key thing to remember about the difference between websites and social media is that social media, you're entirely governed by what the social media platforms think is best. So whatever they want to do with their platforms, they will do. And then it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to change the way that you're delivering your content to meet the changes that the social media platforms have made. The great thing about your website is that that is your walled garden. So that is where you can do whatever you want, however you want, depending on the type of website that you have. I'm obviously not ignorant to the fact that some organizations have better websites than others, and some organizations are very much constricted by their local authority. But your website in general is where you have the most control. So you might be thinking of using social media as a way to get people to your website, where you can share like blogs and, long form content, that sort of stuff. And if you do, some really good examples, the Royal Museums Greenwich, they're excellent at writing blogs at the moment, particularly through search engine optimization. If people want to talk about SEO, we can do that at the break. But definitely check out their content. Basically, if you Google first woman in space, either on the first page or pretty top to the second page of Google, you'll find the Royal Museum Greenwich's blog post about the first woman in space. If you Google first women in space or women in space, again, they'll be up there because they've done search engine optimization on their content so well that they come up in loads of different searches. That's a bit of a tangent, but it is sort of linked to analytics data and the way that you structure your content. So first, key steps for content. Decide on what you're trying to measure. And I think that's important because there's so much data that you can get from social media analytics that if you decided to do everything, you wouldn't achieve anything. So particularly if you're thinking about it within the context of a social media strategy, what you're hoping to achieve through social media, you can very much decide on what you're trying to measure based on what you're trying to achieve. So again, if you're trying to increase conversations, you'll be wanting to focus on, comments, likes, shares, that sort of stuff on your content. If you're trying to build a different audience, then you want to be focusing on the audience information that you can gather through the platforms. And again, I'm not saying that you can only do one of these things. You might want to do a multitude of these things. And if you have clear goals and clear strategies, linking your analytics into that is the most efficient way of seeing how successful you're being. So once you've got the relevant data, you then want to start recording it. There's lots of different ways that you can record it. I love a spreadsheet, but some people just like to put it in Word documents, or however you fancy doing it is fine. I think visualizing the data is really handy, particularly if you're reporting it to people. And Stephen from Egham, he is hopefully going to show us the report that he put together for the campaign that they did. And it's really detailed, but again, it was like a one-off thing that they've not really done before, so you can understand why they put so much detail into it. But you can very much see how they visualize the data, and it's really good for reporting to trustees and that sort of stuff. And then you want to be thinking about what you notice. So in the activity, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but like the trends that you notice with the content that you're putting out there and the things that people are doing on your content. And then thinking about how you can put what you've learned into action. And again, that might feed into a strategy or be fed by a strategy. And then, as I said, with the audience data, you want to benchmark. So you want to know where you're at now and then where you want to be in, however much time. Is everybody happy with that? Brill. Okay, 5-minute break. Slightly behind schedule, but still enough time for a break. So if you want to take 5 minutes, if you could be back here by 11:54. 5-minute break over. Facebook Insights. There was no point in me going away from my slides because now I'm going back to the internet. So 4 or 5 years ago, I used to run a website with friends called Double XP, which was about video games. That's the kind of cool person I am. And for the last sort of 2 or 3 years, we've not done anything with it. So all of the stats are pretty low and they're pretty dead, but it's not actively used. So I feel comfortable in showing everybody the behind the scenes of it all. And then when we're looking at Twitter analytics, we'll look at my personal Twitter. So again, I'm happy to sort of show you it all. But I'm just going to give you a quick overview of where all of the information is and where you can find the different stats. And then we'll go into that activity that I was talking about for 10 or so minutes. And I'll give a little bit more context to the activity when we get there. So there's, as you can see, when you come to Facebook, I'm going to show you my Facebook for a second. I hope you don't mind. When you come to your Facebook, you've got all of this information. You want to find the pages that you manage. So mine is down here in my shortcut. So I click on that and that will take me to the page. And then you want to go to Insights, which is up the top here. Click on Insights, and then this is where you get all of your stats. So the first thing that you're greeted with is an overview. As you can see, not much going on because we're not using it. But it can give you loads of information, and it basically gives you a snapshot. Everything down the left here, these are all the different kinds of data that you can get, and it gives you some really detailed information. This snapshot is basically taking the sort of key information from that left-hand side. So if you're looking for like a general overview of how your page is performing at any given time, you can just look at this and it gives you that snapshot. So things like post reach, page views, page previews, page likes, post engagements, video stats. And then as you keep scrolling down, it will show you your 5 most recent posts, and then it'll give you some information around that as well. And here you can see that it gives you the reach, and it also gives you the engagements. And then when you click on it, it will give you more detailed information about that post. So here's the post. And so this was a video. So the information you can get, like, how many minutes the video has been viewed, how many just 10-second views it had, the average video watch time. So how long people watch the video on average. If you're doing lots of video, I would always recommend posting the video native to the platform. So instead of uploading your video to YouTube and then posting a YouTube link onto Facebook, you would want to upload your video straight to Facebook. And the main reason that is because Facebook will give you all of this data as to how your video is performing on the platform. Whereas on YouTube, if you did it through YouTube, it would just tell you how many people clicked the link. It wouldn't tell you, how long the people viewed it for. You'd then have to go to YouTube and you can get that data there. But the difference is that with Facebook, videos automatically play. So the video will start playing as soon as they scroll past it. Whereas with YouTube, you have to stop, click on the video, click play, wait for it to load, and then it starts. And you've got that sort of like extra step that some people won't take. So another really useful thing down here is pages to watch. And you can set these up yourselves, and you can search for any page you like. So I'm going to search for Museum of, and let's see what it comes up with. Any second now. So the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So if I click that watch page, that'll then be added to my list of pages to watch. And it basically gives you some information about how those different pages are performing. Obviously, the Metropolitan Museum probably isn't the best example to compare some of your museums to, because it's a large organization. But you can find some smaller organizations that you can watch and see how their content is performing and compare it to yourselves. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes it isn't, but I think it's just something that's worth mentioning. After that, you want to have a look at your followers. So this, again, is just very top line information, but it just tells you how many page followers you have as of that day. And the difference between a follower and somebody who likes the page is that a follower is far more likely to see your content, whereas somebody who likes your page, they won't be as likely to see it. Basically, there's tons of people creating content on Facebook. And if Facebook was to show every single thing that every person likes, you just couldn't use the platform as a user. So instead it cherry picks the stuff that they think that those people will be interested in. If they follow something, you're basically telling Facebook that this is something I'm interested in and this is something that I want to see. So it's like an extra step from liking to following, but it just means that they're more likely to see it. It's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean that they definitely will see it. It just means that they're more likely. And again, you can get some basic information about the followers, like, where the page was followed, the type of whether they were organic or whether they were paid followers. So if you paid Facebook to sort of like increase your followers. After that, you've then got reach. And again, this breaks it up into organic and paid. And the interesting thing about the difference between organic reach and paid reach is that if you say give Facebook £10 and they will make your content be seen by 1,000 people, if a few of those 1,000 people like and share it, some of those thousands people's friends on Facebook will see it as well. So that will count as organic reach. And then, sorry, one sec. People talking about Animal Crossing. So that will then count as organic reach as opposed to paid. So you can pay to increase reach, and it will also increase your organic reach. Does that make sense for everyone? Okay. So paid views. Again, just gives you information about how many people are viewing your page. I think we'll quickly go to posts, which I think is probably the most important section. This is where you can get that information on the times that people are online. So here you can see that our audience is mostly online around noon. But that's going to be different depending on the audiences that you have. You can also see like their most active days as well, which is quite handy. So you can sort of get a sense on what days might be useful to post your content. And then you've got down here is information about your posts. So again, you've got that like breakup between reach and engagement. And then when you click on it, it gives you even more information. So it tells you the types of engagement. So you can see here, you've got like likes on posts. You can see like likes on other people's posts as well. So if somebody shared it and then somebody else has liked it, that all sort of contributes towards that information. And again, it gives you an opportunity to see how successful a piece of content is. Again, based on that sort of number of people reached compared to number of engagements. And then, you can click see more, and you can basically keep going through. Because we've not posted in so long, there's not a huge amount of information available, but there'll be a lot more information available on your social media analytics. And then people, this is where you find all of your audience information. Again, as I said, it's quite binary, breaking it down between men and women. And then you've got sort of general idea of the ages. This was a Facebook page for a website about video games. So you'd sort of expect that it would be a little bit more male leaning. And it would also have a sort of younger audience. I don't know how to stop that coming up, sorry. And then you've also got the information here about where they're based. So, 834 in the UK, but then it also gives you a breakdown of their city, which if you're trying to build a more local audience, that could be some really useful information to have an idea of where they're based. If you've got lots of audience members based internationally, then maybe you don't want to be posting too much content about events and that sort of stuff that you're doing, because the likelihood of them attending is quite low. At the same time, if you want to use social media to increase the number of people attending your events, then maybe you want to spend some time working on building a more local audience. It's not easy. Just because you know these stats doesn't mean that you'll then just be able to do it. But it does give you a much better idea of what you need to do to achieve your goals. So that is just a real quick overview of Facebook Insights. I would really recommend just spending some time looking through and thinking about the sorts of things that you want to achieve through social media, and then thinking about where you're going to find those statistics. And then that way you won't have to spend so much time clicking through every single thing and seeing what's interesting. You can just go to, the posts and people might be the two main things that you want to look at. You can ignore the other things and save yourselves a bit of time. Is everybody happy with that? So we're going to go on to the activity now. So the activity is going to be on Facebook. So just for about 10 minutes, so until 20 past 12, we're going to be focusing on the audience section of Facebook, because their audience stuff, I think, is a little bit better than Twitter's. So if you've got access to your Facebook pages, then you want to look at analyzing your audience. You want to think about the sorts of things that you're trying to achieve through social media, and then make a suggestion based on your analysis of the audience. So let's say that if your audience is predominantly over 65, but you're trying to use Facebook to reach under 25s, then your suggestion would be potentially change up our content so that we reach more under 25s, or your suggestion would be let's start a new social media channel that is dedicated to a younger audience. Do you understand the activity? Brilliant. And then ignore those bits at the end there. They're not relevant. So we're just going to do that for about 10 minutes. I'm going to put you into your Zoom groups again, so you can sort of talk to each other and help each other out. So this is my personal Twitter analytics, and I'll show you how you get to it. And again, if any organization will have the same analytics as an individual, and every individual will have the same analytics as me. So you go to www.twitter.com, click more, and then you click analytics. And then that will load up a separate tab which has all of the analytics information for your Twitter account. Similar to Facebook, you're going to be greeted with that sort of like top line information first off. And the way that Twitter does it is it breaks it down by month. So you'll have your current month and how you're performing on Twitter in that month. And then as you scroll down, it has subsequent months. You're also greeted with this top line stuff here, which can be useful now and then if you just want a snapshot of how you're performing. So it tells you, tweets versus impressions versus profile visits, mentions, and then followers. Again, this is really top line stuff, so you're not going to get a huge amount of information from it. But it can be helpful to just sort of get that quick snapshot look at how you're doing. So if you're having a really good, it's a 28-day summary. So if you're having a really good 28 days, you'll expect to see a lot of green. If you've had a quiet 28 days, again, a lot of red. I've not done many tweets in the last 28 days because of being busy and such. But in general, the more tweets you do, the more engagements and impressions you'll get, and you'll see that those statistics are going up. And then this is what I was talking about, the breakdown of months. So it gives you like highlights. So your top tweet, your top mention, top media tweet. It's a video of me racing a drone. Unsurprisingly, I was not quicker than the drone. I actually looked like I was sprinting, but running at a jogging pace. I was quite impressed at how terrible my running form is. And then, yeah, so as you scroll through, it gives you an overview of the other months as well. And you can see that sort of like top line information that you can see at the top there. You can see down here. So like number of tweets, profile visits, new followers, mentions. And basically, it's very top line information, but if you wanted to just get a real quick snapshot, that's where you can find it. The real sort of main information is up here when you click tweets, and this will give you a breakdown of your individual tweets, and you can also decide by date range for the tweets that you're seeing. So again, it starts off by giving you a 28-day period, and you can see when you had your sort of like busiest days. Again, this is done by day, so 3,862 organic impressions from 5 tweets. So it's not telling you that you that's like the one information around one tweet. It collates all of the tweets that you do each day and then gives you the conjoined impressions. And again, down here, this is where it gives you the information on each tweet. And the useful thing that Twitter does that I don't think Facebook does is it gives you the engagement rate. Do you remember me talking about the breakdown between impressions and engagements? Twitter gives you it automatically. So if we find a slightly successful tweet, here we go. So 3,925 impressions, engagement rate of 7.2%. That's not too bad. So this information, when you click on the tweet itself, it gives you things like the number of times people click the link, the number of times people expanded the tweet so that they could see the full thing, the number of times people clicked on your profile, the likes, media engagements, retweets, and replies. Also, if somebody was to have clicked on that tweet and then followed you subsequently, it would also tell you how many new followers you gained based on that tweet, which I think is quite useful. And again, you can sort of like just scroll through, get a gist of how everything's going. And then you can change the date range up here. So you can choose the date in which you want to look at. So you can click on it by months. So down here, let's have a look at May. Yeah, May wasn't as great. March. There you go. March was a good month. So so on the 17th of March, whatever I was doing, I was sending lots of tweets. I think I might have done a thread on that day, actually. But anyway, you can sort of have a look through. Oh, here we go. London's non-national museums working towards accredited museums. So I was saying that I can give advice on stuff. And then also a thread on platforms for free live streaming. So again, you can sort of see how well those tweets performed. And again, you've got that sort of like breakdown of statistics. So you can see that it was only a 3.3% engagement rate. So whilst it was seen by a lot of people, there weren't a huge number of engagements. But then when it loads, we can have a look at the types of engagements. And then what I would do is have a look at the tweet, look at the types of the number of impressions, the percentage breakdown between impressions and engagements. And then I'd look at the types of engagements and I'd think about the piece of content and what I was trying to achieve with it. So for this piece of content, I was just trying to share some useful information around platforms for live streaming. So I wasn't necessarily thinking people were going to, reply to it. I wasn't necessarily thinking people were going to follow me because of it. But I was hoping that people would expand it, retweet it, and engage with the links that I was sharing. So, if I was being brutally honest, I'd probably want these statistics to be higher. But again, this is the first tweet of a thread. So you can't judge it based on that one. You have to look at some of the parts of that thread, which isn't quite as easy to do through Twitter. I can't see if I can find it. Well, wherever it is, you could have a look through the subsequent tweets. and you can have a look at how many people click links. So for me, I'd be looking at how many people click the links to get more information about some of the free live streaming platforms that are available, and I'd then judge how successful it was based on that. You can also usually get audience information, but I can't seem to see where that is, unless Twitter's removed it. Weird. But then on your tweets along the right-hand side here, it gives you, again, over those 28 days, it gives you sort of more detailed information. So similar to that bar chart here, looking at impressions, it gives you a chart looking at engagements over the days as well. So you can sort of see, you know, if you were doing a campaign, let's say, like maybe a fundraising campaign, or you know, something more specific around a specific theme of content, you might be wanting to see a more sort of like steady engagement rate, so like more of a steady climb. Whereas the way that I tweet, it tends to just sort of be ad hoc. It's more personal, so you kind of expect it to have lots of peaks and dips, just where I'm tweeting some days and not others. Same for like links clicked, retweets, likes, and replies. So that's Twitter analytics. It's a lot more basic than Facebook. You don't get anywhere near as much detailed information, but the way that they present that information, I think, is a lot more user friendly, and it's a lot easier to get an idea of how well your content's working. So we're going to do another 10-minute activity now, and what that activity is going to be is, again, looking at your so going into Twitter analytics, or looking at the document that I shared with some example Twitter content. What you want to do is, let's get up my slide for it. So what you want to do is look at your performance over the last few months. I would say pick 1 month, and maybe pick a month where you know you had quite a few tweets and that you were quite active on social media. You want to look at the 4 top performing tweets. So the 4 tweets that seem to have done the best out of all of the rest in that month. And then you want to look at them and decide what made them so successful. And again, it's very much down to what you want to achieve through social media. So my idea of success would be very different to your idea of success. So you want to focus on, you know, what you deem as successful. Find those 4 top performing tweets, and then look for correlations between them. If it was me, I would probably do maybe 5 or 6 every month, and just sort of look for correlations. So maybe you posted a picture in one of the tweets, but in a similar tweet you didn't, and the one without a picture got less hits, whereas the one with a picture got more. Maybe you got lots more comments one month because you posted something that was a bit more conversational than you usually would. And again, you can sort of like, you can draw out those that context as to why the content was a bit more successful than your other stuff. And the idea behind that is that you can then make sort of suggestions for future content. So if you notice that tweets with pictures do better than tweets without, maybe a suggestion for future content would be to include more pictures in your tweets. And then again, the whole time you want to be thinking about what your goals for social media use are, and whether or not the stats that you're gathering from the analytics are showing the way that you're using social media is successful for what you're trying to achieve. Is everybody happy with that? Cool. So I'm going to put you in your groups again.
So thanks, Alec, for inviting me down, and hopefully what I'm about to say is at least semi-educational. So I'm I was recently appointed the Digital Engagement Officer at Egham Museum, literally the Friday before we went into lockdown. And this is the first time that a Digital Engagement Officer role has been part of the museum team. I probably worth saying that before this, we have had various guises of the role that has gone down more of a marketing route than necessarily a collections story-based kind of route. So I'm not necessarily the one promoting events that the museum is running. I'm purely designed to, or kind of focused on telling stories about our collections. So Egger Museum is a very small independent museum just based outside of Windsor, and it kind of anecdotally runs on a shoestring budget of about £2,000 to cover costs. Anything else, and the money that employs me and the rest of the team here is through grants from the council or independent project grants. And we've slowly, over the last 5 years, managed to build up momentum and also a team, because we've gone for continual grant money. And because of the continual grants, we've been able to push and incorporate more kind of resource in terms of money to allow a digital engagement officer. So that is a rough kind of breakdown. So I'm here to talk about the campaign that we ran at the beginning of April, which was the National Oddities Championship. Conveniently, we put together a nice glossy report for you all to enjoy and read before you go to bed later. There will be questions in the video. No, I'm joking. But anyway, so the purpose of the National Oddities Championship is very closely tied to another digital venture that we started at the beginning of 2020, which was our podcast, Egger Oddities, available on all good podcasting platforms. Yes, that is a plug. And basically, it came to me, the idea of the Oddity Championships as a way in which we could, A, raise the profile of our very small museum on Twitter, but two, well, secondly, we could drive some traffic and promote our podcast at the same time. Now, what the team here, I mean, we sort of say that we have an odd collection, and odd to us normally means it's fairly mundane, reflective of everyday life, and it's the type of object that people will say, oh, I remember that. That's not really history. But of course, an oddity could mean anything to anyone. It could be something that doesn't fit within the kind of traditional scope of your collections, or it could be something that's, you know, really just bizarre. So what I wanted to do, because there wasn't any sports taking place, was hold a sports competition on Twitter, and it was all about oddities. So I basically spent 3 days sliding into people's Twitter DMs and asking whether they wanted to be part of my 16-man or 16-team competition. Because maths isn't my strong point, I ended up with 17. So it's the only competition where we hold a 16-man competition with 17 participants. But hey, it's odd in itself. And I was also keen to create a competition that wasn't just all of the big nationals. It wasn't just small local museums. I wanted a nice range of big nationals, small independent museums, and sort of what you might regional museums. So for instance, we had the Natural History Museum in London, which was our kind of main attraction, with their 2.5 million followers. But then we also had the likes of Crawley Museum, ourselves, and then we also had Leeds Museum and Art Galleries and the Royal Armouries. So there was a good geographic spread as well. We also had the National Library of Scotland. And all I asked the various participants was just to send me an odd picture from their collection. So in some respects, it was all they had on their phone because they were in lockdown, but they all willingly obliged, and then they sent me it. So as you can see on the front page here, we released this was our first tweet, which was the day before the competition start, where we did a kind of mock-up demolition derby that was really kind of over the top with like a really bad kind of American accent, kind of saying that 16 heritage organizations will battle it out to the death to win the National Oddity Championships title, and eternal bragging rights, etc., etc. Completely over the top. The video, you know, is kind of a bit homespun and rustic, but completely perfect for the whole bizarre kind of thing we were trying to do. You wouldn't mind scrolling down now, Alex? And then the following 2 days, we ran the competition. So we had the round of 16, round of quarterfinals, and then the day after that, we had the semi-finals and finals. The way we worked out the knockout was we did it by a public vote. So each vote was live for 3 hours. And then basically people were just voting on which of the two they thought was the most weird. Now, what I decided to do quite deliberately was that everything was ran from the Egham Museum channel. So all of their content was sent to me, and then I curated it on our channel. Now, I did that because quite astutely, I wanted our channel to be the one that was getting the most promotion. So I just tagged all of the relevant institutions in, and then they would be retweeting us, and then their followers are then retweeting them, but I'm still getting the biggest payoff. So I've put in the most work, but I'm also getting the biggest payoff. And as you can see here, over the 2 days, we got those kind of figures, 200 new followers. If scroll down for a bit. So yeah, that's how it worked. The outcomes, as you can see in the sort of pie chart, 7th and 9th of April, when the competition ran, we got 384,000, which is just underneath the entirety of the impressions that we got for the year before. So within those 2 days, a sustained amount of engagement with around this competition, and also by using our channel as the central kind of communicator, it really did give us a massive boost in publicity. And we were also really surprised and grateful for the fact that every other organization really got on board with it and started taking it really seriously. So then each of their channels started having rivalries, and then they would start appealing to their followers and supporters. They started making GIFs and all sorts of things. And then as the kind of competition progressed and it got a little bit more serious, they would then start appealing to their followers or their greatest advocates. So for instance, you've got historians like Kate Lister and Lindsay Fitzharris getting involved and appealing to their kind of listeners and their followers. And then you have the National Library of Scotland calling on the Orkney Library to lend them their support. So it was really good in the sense that we got a great level of engagement, and we got it was able to sort of push our kind of museum into the public domain. But beyond that, I think what we also wanted was, we didn't want this just to be something purely online, and we wanted to use it as a way to build new potential collaborations with other museums. So as the point here says, as a result of the competition, we're looking at how we might be able to work with people like Derby Museums or Bradford Museums and maybe feature some of their oddities on our podcast. So the Egham oddities in that instance will be me, Sarah and Amy from Egham, and us as being the oddities rather than the item. But sort of kind of building a reputation for talking about the objects that museums don't necessarily talk about as much, but yet might actually be a greater hook into or pique people's interest, because it's a little bit more of a curveball, and it's not just a golden mummy bust or something like that. Yeah, and hopefully we're going to be able to continue with the momentum. So the context obviously was during COVID, during lockdown. So all of these situations kind of were right for more people to engage with it, because more people were just online in general. And it kind of took off. So yeah, I think that's basically it, really. It was a lot of work, I would say. A lot of out of hours work for me, especially. And I think it's 100% worth it. And I think it wouldn't have been as successful if I didn't invest, or we didn't decide to invest the time ourselves to run it the way we did. It definitely wouldn't have been as successful for our museum. But as the results kind of show you, and as I've briefly said, we did manage to gain a massive following. We've already had people asking for when the next National Oddity Championships is going to take place. As you can see from some of the highlight tweets we've captured here, everyone, it felt like, was talking about our competition. And it kind of really caught people's imagination. And our podcast is slowly going up in terms of its listens and engagement, and an activity like this didn't do it any harm.